Before I start with Schopenhauer, let me first say thank you to my first group of channel members. I appreciate you guys. If you'd like to become a channel member and get early access to most videos and whatever other goodies I dream up later on, look for a link down below. I'd very much appreciate it. On Criticism is the 8th essay in Schopenhauer's Art of Literature. Like other essays in this volume, it is in part a work that is assembled by T. Bailey Saunders, the translator, from parts of several different essays in Schopenhauer's late work Peroga. It covers a number of topics, including taste, how we should go about judging works of genius, the relative rareness of good critical judgment in the present day, in science as well as in art and literature, the role that authority plays in most people's aesthetic judgment, the proper function of literary journals, and towards the end, stay tuned for Schopenhauer's comments on anonymity. He feels very strongly about that, and I think that's got a relevance for us in our own place and time. In this first section, Schopenhauer will define taste and criticism, mentioning, of course, that by and large today, neither one of these really exists, and give us some rules for judging. Here's what he writes. The following brief remarks on the critical faculty are chiefly intended to show that, for the most part, there is no such thing. It is a rara avis, almost as rare indeed as the phoenix, which appears only once in 500 years. When we speak of taste, an expression not chosen with any regard for it, we mean the discovery, or it might be only the recognition, of what is right aesthetically, apart from the guidance of any rule. And this either because no rule has as yet been extended to the matter in question, or else because, if existing, it is unknown to the artist or the critic, as the case may be. Instead of taste, we might use the expression aesthetic sense, if this were not tautological. The perceptive critical taste is, so to speak, the female analog to the male quality of productive talent or genius. Not capable of begetting great work itself, it consists in a capacity of reception, that is to say, of recognizing as such what is right, fit, beautiful, or the reverse. In other words, of discriminating the good from the bad, of discovering and appreciating the one and condemning the other. In appreciating a genius, criticism should not deal with the errors in his productions, or with the poorer of his works, and then proceed to rate him low. It should attend only to the qualities in which he most excels. For in the sphere of intellect, as in other spheres, weakness and perversity cleave so firmly to human nature that even the most brilliant mind is not wholly and at all times free from them. Hence the great errors to be found even in the works of the greatest men. Or as Horace puts it, quandoque bonus dormitat Homerus. Even good Homer nods. That which distinguishes genius, and should be the standard for judging it, is the height to which it is able to soar when it is in the proper mood and finds a fitting occasion, a height always out of reach of ordinary talent. And, in like manner, it is a very dangerous thing to compare two great men of the same class, for instance, two great poets, or musicians, or philosophers, or artists, because injustice to the one or the other, at least for the moment, can hardly be avoided. For in making a comparison of the kind, the critic looks to some particular merit of one, and at once discovers that it is absent in the other, who is thereby disparaged. But then, if the process is reversed, and the critic begins with the latter and discovers his peculiar merit, which is of quite a different order from that presented by the former, with whom it may be looked for in vain, the result is that both of them suffer undue depreciation. There are critics who severally think that it rests with each one of them what shall be accounted good and what bad. They all mistake their own toy trumpets for the trombones of fame. A drug does not effect its purpose if the dose is too large, and it is the same with censure and adverse criticism, when it exceeds the measure of justice. One of the first things Schopenhauer tells us then is that good taste today really is non-existent. Nobody has good taste. It's exceedingly rare, like the phoenix, which only hatches out of its egg once every 500 years. I like his talk here of an aesthetic sense, this kind of ability to recognize good or bad work as the kind of receptive feminine counterpart to the creative genius, the genius that can sort of boldly make something new, and then this more receptive, passive capacity to recognize and applaud what is genuinely of high quality. That seems to me that there's a kind of relationship between those that's worth paying attention to. He also gives us some advice, a couple pieces of advice. First, judge an artist by the best and not the worst that he produces, because all of us, even the greatest among us, are flawed. Homer sometimes nods. And don't compare two excellent workers, two geniuses, to each other, because this would be fair to neither one of them. There is something, it seems, kind of sui generis, unique, one of a kind, about each artistic and literary genius. He's going to have strengths which are unique to him, with which other people of equal excellence will suffer by comparison. So we'll turn to the second section next, in which Schopenhauer laments the rareness of good taste in our time. Here's what he writes. The disastrous thing for intellectual merit is that it must wait for those to praise the good who have themselves produced nothing but what is bad. Nay, it is a primary misfortune that it has to receive its crown at the hands of the critical power of mankind, a quality of which most men possess only the weak and impotent semblance, so that the reality may be numbered amongst the rarest gifts of nature. Hence La Bruyere's remark is, unhappily, as true as it is neat. After the spirit of discernment, he says, the next rarest thing in the world are diamonds and pearls. The spirit of discernment, the critical faculty, it is these that are lacking. Men do not know how to distinguish the genuine from the false, the corn from the chaff, gold from copper, or to perceive the wide gulf that separates a genius from an ordinary man. Thus we have that bad state of things described in an old-fashioned verse, which gives it as the lot of the great ones here on earth to be recognized only when they are gone. Es ist nun das Geschick der Großen hier auf Erden, erst wann sie nicht mehr sind, von uns erkannt zu werden. It's just the fate of everyone whose greatness is on earth, that only when they're dead and gone do we admit their worth. When any genuine and excellent work makes its appearance, the chief difficulty, in its way, is the amount of bad work it finds already in possession of the field, and accepted as though it were good. And then if, after a long time, the newcomer really succeeds, by a hard struggle, in vindicating his place for himself and winning reputation, he will soon encounter fresh difficulty from some affected, dull, awkward imitator, whom people drag in with the object of calmly setting him up on the altar beside the genius, not seeing the difference, and really thinking that here they have to do with another great man. This is what Yrarte means by the first lines of his 28th fable, where he declares that the ignorant rabble always set equal value on the good and the bad. Siempre acostumbra hacer el vulgo necio de lo bueno y lo malo igual aprecio. The stupid rabble has always had equal pleasure from good and bad. So even Shakespeare's dramas had, immediately after his death, to give place to those of Ben Jonson, Massinger, Beaumont, and Fletcher, and to yield the supremacy for 100 years. So Kant's serious philosophy was crowded out by the nonsense of Fichte, Schelling, Jacobi, and Hegel. And even in a sphere accessible to all, we have seen unworthy imitators quickly diverting public attention from the incomparable Walter Scott. For say what you will, the public has no sense for excellence, and therefore no notion how very rare it is to find men really capable of doing anything great in poetry, philosophy, or art, or that their works are alone worthy of exclusive attention. The dabblers, whether in verse or in any other high sphere, should be every day unsparingly reminded that neither gods nor men nor booksellers have pardoned their mediocrity. Mediocribus esse poetis non homines non di non concessere columnae. To be mediocre is allowed the poet neither by the gods, nor human beings, nor even advertising pillars. Are they not the weeds that prevent the corn coming up, so that they may cover the ground themselves? And then there happens that which has been well and freshly described by the lamented Feuchtersleben, who died so young, how people cry out in their haste that nothing is being done, while all the while great work is quietly growing to maturity. Translator's note: Ernst Freiherr von Feuchtersleben, 1806-49, an Austrian physician, philosopher, and poet, and a specialist in medical psychology. The best known of his songs is that beginning, Es ist bestimmt in Gottes Rath, to which Mendelssohn composed one of his finest melodies. And then when it appears, it is not seen or heard in the clamor, but goes its way silently in modest grief. Ist doch, rufen sie vermessen, nix im Werke nichts getan, und das Große rieft indessen still heran. Es erscheint nun, niemand sieht es, niemand hört es im Geschrei, mit bescheidener Trauer sieht es still vorbei. Nothing's in the making, they cry, and nothing has been done, yet greatness ripens by and by unsung. It appears now, though none can see, no one hears it in the fray. In grief it wanders modestly away. This lamentable death of the critical faculty is not less obvious in the case of science, as is shown by the tenacious life of false and disproved theories. If they are once accepted, they may go on bidding defiance to truth for 50 or even 100 years and more, as stable as an iron pier in the midst of the waves. The Ptolemaic system was still held a century after Copernicus had promulgated his theory. Bacon, Descartes, and Locke made their way extremely slowly and only after a long time, as the reader may see by D'Alembert's celebrated preface to the Encyclopedia. Newton was not more successful, and this is sufficiently proved by the bitterness and contempt with which Leibniz attacked his theory of gravitation in the controversy with Clarke. Although Newton lived for almost 40 years after the appearance of the Principia, his teaching was, when he died, only to some extent accepted in his own country, whilst outside England he counted scarcely 20 adherents, if we may believe the introductory note to Voltaire's exposition of his theory. It was indeed chiefly owing to this treatise of Voltaire's that the system became known in France nearly 20 years after Newton's death. Until then, a firm, resolute, and patriotic stand was made by the Cartesian vortices, whilst only 40 years previously this same Cartesian philosophy had been forbidden in the French schools, and now in turn D'Aguesseau, the chancellor, refused Voltaire the imprimatur for his treatise on the Newtonian doctrine. On the other hand, in our day, Newton's absurd theory of color still completely holds the field, 40 years after the publication of Goethe's. Hume, too, was disregarded up to his 50th year, though he began very early and wrote in a thoroughly popular style. And Kant, in spite of having written and talked all his life long, did not become a famous man until he was 60. Artists and poets have, to be sure, more chance than thinkers, because their public is at least 100 times as large. Still, what was thought of Beethoven and Mozart during their lives? What of Dante? What even of Shakespeare? If the latter's contemporaries had in any way recognized his worth, at least one good and accredited portrait of him would have come down to us from an age when the art of painting flourished, whereas we possess only some very doubtful pictures, a bad copperplate, and a still worse bust on his tomb. And in like manner, if he had been duly honored, specimens of his handwriting would have been preserved to us by the hundred, instead of being confined, as is the case, to the signatures to a few legal documents. The Portuguese are still proud of their only poet, Camoens. He lived, however, on alms collected every evening in the street by a black slave whom he had brought with him from the Indies. In time, no doubt, justice will be done everyone. Tempo e galant uomo. But it is as late and slow in arriving as in a court of law, and the secret condition of it is that the recipient shall be no longer alive. The precept of Jesus the son of Sirach is faithfully followed. Judge none blessed before his death. He then who has produced immortal works must find comfort by applying to them the words of the Indian myth, that the minutes of life amongst the immortals seem like years of earthly existence, and so too that the years upon earth are only as the minutes of the immortals. This lack of critical insight is also shown by the fact that, while in every century the excellent work of earlier time is held in honor, that of its own is misunderstood, and the attention which is its due is given to bad work, such as every decade carries with it, only to be the sport of the next. That men are slow to recognize genuine merit when it appears in their own age also proves that they do not understand or enjoy or really value the long-acknowledged works of genius, which they honor only on the score of authority. The crucial test is the fact that bad work, Fichte's philosophy, for example, if it wins any reputation, also maintains it for 1 or 2 generations, and only when its public is very large does its fall follow sooner. Schopenhauer tells us here that excellence, real genuine human excellence, will be recognized late or not at all. And of some of the problems that excellent work faces in any generation, first, that there's so much chaff, just so much nonsense and garbage and bad work already there, sort of occupying the cultural space, that many people think, because it's there, is already high quality. And that even once a great artist or thinker is able to break through that sort of generic mediocrity that holds the field when he arrives, he is immediately beset by and sort of stood up alongside very lousy, low-quality imitators. Because the minute he does something creative and new and genius, there's somebody else coming up trying to produce what they seems to be sort of an external copy of it. It's something that copies it in the externals but doesn't really speak of the same genius. So just as soon as we have something worthwhile, we've got a whole bunch of pale, crappy imitators. That seems like something that is even truer in our own time in the age of the internet and the AI imitations and fake books on Amazon and the like. I do like his quotation here from one of his favorite Spanish authors, Uriarte, the author of the animal fables. The vulgar mob is accustomed to praising both the good and the bad equally, because they sort of, from the perspective of the low and the vulgar, they are equally as good. They're entertaining, right? It's like, feels like movies that have spectacle. Well, provided that they sort of, there's things blow up and there's lots of exciting moments, whether one is especially deep or especially high quality and for the ages is not going to be determined by the masses themselves. Just the very character of mass judgment is such that it's going to miss what is truly great in any particular work of art. And even a genius like Shakespeare, he notes, was underappreciated in his own time, so like corn surrounded by weeds. He had immediately to give way to other inferior playwrights in the generations after him. The same thing, it turns out, happens in science, where false theories will hang on in the popular imagination long after they've been refuted for anyone who actually knows what they're talking about. And I feel here we can feel some of the same frustration in our own time that Schopenhauer doubtless feels in his regarding color theory, when we think about theories about diet. How the science of diet seems not, the popular understanding and even sort of government propaganda doesn't seem to have caught up to what really are the general facts about diet. We can prove that something is good or bad for you. It doesn't seem to affect the way in which most people will think about and appreciate the nature of diet. I won't go into details about that. People can substitute their own observations about places where scientific knowledge, false theories continue to hang on long after they've been shown to be false. He also notes here that one mark of bad work in any field, including in philosophy, is that something will flourish and become a fad for a decade or two, and then it'll just sort of fade away and yield to the next bad thing. That's a good indication that you're dealing with a succession of bad things rather than the rising appreciation for a lasting work of genius. In the third section of this essay, Schopenhauer is going to elaborate how the true appreciation of great work requires an equally great audience. That's one reason why it's so uncommon. Here's what he writes. Now, just as the sun cannot shed its light but to the eye that sees it, nor music, sound, but to the hearing ear, so the value of all masterly work in art and science is conditioned by the kinship and capacity of the mind to which it speaks. It is only such a mind as this that possesses the magic word to stir and call forth the spirits that lie hidden in great work. To the ordinary mind, a masterpiece is a sealed cabinet of mystery, an unfamiliar musical instrument from which the player, however much he may flatter himself, can draw none but confused tones. How different a painting looks when seen in a good light, as compared with some dark corner. Just in the same way, the impression made by a masterpiece varies with the capacity of the mind to understand it. A fine work, then, requires a mind sensitive to its beauty. A thoughtful work, a mind that can really think, if it is to exist and live at all. But, alas, it may happen only too often that he who gives a fine work to the world afterwards feels like a maker of fireworks, who displays with enthusiasm the wonders that have taken him so much time and trouble to prepare, and then learns that he has come to the wrong place, and that the fancied spectators were one and all inmates of an asylum for the blind. Still, even that is better than if his public had consisted entirely of men who made fireworks themselves. As in this case, if his display had been extraordinarily good, it might possibly have cost him his head. The source of all pleasure and delight is the feeling of kinship. Even with the sense of beauty, it is unquestionably our own species in the animal world, and then again our own race, that appears to us the fairest. So too, in intercourse with others, every man shows a decided preference for those who resemble him, and a blockhead will find the society of another blockhead incomparably more pleasant than that of any number of great minds put together. Every man must necessarily take his chief pleasure in his own work, because it is the mirror of his own mind, the echo of his own thought. And next in order will come the work of people like him, that is to say, a dull, shallow, and perverse man, a dealer in mere words, will give his sincere and hearty applause only to that which is dull, shallow, perverse, or merely verbose. On the other hand, he will allow merit to the work of great minds only on the score of authority, in other words, because he is ashamed to speak his opinion, for in reality they give him no pleasure at all. They do not appeal to him, nay, they repel him, and he will not confess this even to himself. The works of genius cannot be fully enjoyed except by those who are themselves of the privileged order. The first recognition of them, however, when they exist without authority to support them, demands considerable superiority of mind. When the reader takes all this into consideration, he should be surprised not that great work is so late in winning reputation, but that it wins it at all. And as a matter of fact, fame comes only by a slow and complex process. The stupid person is by degrees forced, and as it were, tamed, into recognizing the superiority of one who stands immediately above him. This one in turn bows before someone else. And so it goes on until the weight of the votes gradually prevail over their number. And this is just the condition of all genuine, in other words, deserved, fame. But until then, the greatest genius, even after he has passed his time of trial, stands like a king amidst a crowd of his own subjects, who do not know him by sight, and therefore will not do his behests, unless indeed his chief ministers of state are in his train. For no subordinate official can be the direct recipient of the royal commands, as he knows only the signature of his immediate superior, and this is repeated all the way up into the highest ranks, where the undersecretary attests the minister's signature, and the minister that of the king. There are analogous stages to be passed before a genius can attain widespread fame. This is why his reputation most easily comes to a standstill at the very outset, because the highest authorities, of whom there can be but few, are most frequently not to be found. But the further down he goes in the scale, the more numerous are those who take the word from above, so that his fame is no more arrested. We must console ourselves for this state of things by reflecting that it is really fortunate that the greater number of men do not form a judgment on their own responsibility, but merely take it on authority. For what sort of criticism should we have on Plato and Kant, Homer, Shakespeare, and Goethe, if every man were to form his opinion by what he really has and enjoys of these writers, instead of being forced by authority to speak of them in a fit and proper way, however little he may really feel what he says? Unless something of this kind took place, it would be impossible for true merit in any high sphere to attain fame at all. At the same time, it is also fortunate that every man has just so much critical power of his own as is necessary for recognizing the superiority of those who are placed immediately over him, and for following their lead. This means that the many come in the end to submit to the authority of the few, and there results that hierarchy of critical judgments on which is based the possibility of a steady and eventually wide-reaching fame. The lowest class in the community is quite impervious to the merits of a great genius, and for these people there is nothing left but the monument raised to him, which, by the impression it produces on their senses, awakes in them a dim idea of the man's greatness. Schopenhauer tells us that ordinary minds cannot even hear works of genius. So a work of genius is like a locked chest for them. And he has this fantastic image that sticks in the mind of a fireworks maker who's showing, the great, sort of one-time only result of all the hard work that he's gone to, and then realizing that he's performing in an asylum for the blind. Not a single person is going to be able to see any of the things that he's been demonstrating for them. That itself seems to be related to Schopenhauer's own writing career, his rejection by the public and the authorities as a philosopher, along with the immediate sequel, which is the only worst thing for that fireworks maker would be if he had been performing for an audience of his peers and rivals, in which case, if they had recognized the true quality and excellence of his work, they would have put him to death as a rival. So he's guaranteed to be either completely unappreciated by people who are blind to his genius, or outright murdered by people who are jealous of his genius. In no case do we find an audience that actually is going to be able to appreciate and praise the genius fireworks maker. That's a great image, and I think very autobiographical from Schopenhauer's perspective. Another observation, very Schopenhauerian in character: each of us necessarily judges aesthetically by what is similar to himself. And this is especially the case with blockheads. Blockheads will seek out the society of other blockheads and will praise the same things and sort of reinforce each other. This is how we end up with what we have today, aesthetic and political bubbles in which people only exchange information with each other. And so when most people will praise a great work, like the work of Shakespeare or Goethe or some other work of a lasting cultural genius, they do so only due to authority, only because other people praise it, because it's supposed to be good. So there's this great image of each person takes the cue from his immediate superiors, people who are slightly above him in this sort of cultural and social hierarchy. He praises what they like, even if he only sort of half understands what it is and how they like it. And eventually, after a long time, the sort of overall weight of this will become sort of general cultural authority. We'll agree that Shakespeare is good, not because each of us has appreciated the fullness of his genius, but because each of us has sort of yielded to the sort of next higher ranking person in the social hierarchy. There's this image of a king unknown to his subjects, who's sort of waiting for word to get down, the orders that he's given to be enforced. He can't command their loyalty and their action directly. He has to do it through this slow process of intermediaries. So eventually, after a long time, genius can be recognized, and this is the origin of intellectual and aesthetic hierarchy, Schopenhauer says. This might be worth comparing with some of Nietzsche's thoughts on the same subject. In the next section, Schopenhauer is going to talk about the good and bad functions of literary journals, and also give us his maybe somewhat controversial thoughts on anonymity. Here's what he writes. Literary journals should be a dam against the unconscionable scribbling of the age and the ever-increasing deluge of bad and useless books. Their judgments should be uncorrupted, just, and rigorous, and every piece of bad work done by an incapable person, every device by which the empty head tries to come to the assistance of the empty purse, that is to say, about 9/10 of all existing books, should be mercilessly scourged. Literary journals would then perform their duty, which is to keep down the craving for writing and put a check upon the deception of the public, instead of furthering these evils by a miserable toleration which plays into the hands of author and publisher and robs the reader of his time and his money. If there were such a paper as I mean, every bad writer, every brainless compiler, every plagiarist from others' books, every hollow and incapable place-hunter, every sham philosopher, every vain and languishing poetaster would shudder at the prospect of the pillory in which this bad work would inevitably have to stand soon after publication. This would paralyze his twitching fingers to the true welfare of literature, in which what is bad is not only useless, but positively pernicious. Now, most books are bad and ought to have remained unwritten. Consequently, praise should be as rare as is now the case with blame, which is withheld under the influence of personal considerations, coupled with the maxim acceda socius laudes lauderis ud absens. Draw near, friend, and praise me as though I were absent. It is quite wrong to try to introduce into literature the same toleration as must necessarily prevail in society towards those stupid, brainless people who everywhere swarm in it. In literature, such people are impudent intruders, and to disparage the bad is here duty towards the good, for he who thinks nothing bad will think nothing good either. Politeness, which has its source in social relations, is in literature an alien and often injurious element, because it exacts that bad work shall be called good. In this way, the very aim of science and art is directly frustrated. The ideal journal could, to be sure, be written only by people who joined incorruptible honesty with rare knowledge and still rarer power of judgment, so that perhaps there could, at the very most, be one, or even hardly one, in the whole country. But there it would stand, like a just Areopagus, every member of which would have to be elected by all the others. Under the system that prevails at present, literary journals are carried on by a clique, and secretly perhaps also by booksellers for the good of the trade. And they are often nothing but coalitions of bad heads to prevent the good ones succeeding. As Goethe once remarked to me, nowhere is there so much dishonesty as in literature. But above all, anonymity, that shield of all literary rascality, would have to disappear. It was introduced under the pretext of protecting the honest critic, who warned the public against the resentment of the author and his friends. But where there is one case of this sort, there will be 100 where it merely serves to take all responsibility from the man who cannot stand by what he has said, or possibly to conceal the shame of one who has been cowardly and base enough to recommend a book to the public for the purpose of putting money into his own pocket. Often enough, it is only a cloak for covering the obscurity, incompetence, and insignificance of the critic. It is incredible what impudence these fellows will show, and what literary trickery they will venture to commit as soon as they know they are safe under the shadow of anonymity. Let me recommend a general anti-criticism, a universal medicine or panacea to put a stop to all anonymous reviewing, whether it praises the bad or blames the good. Rascal, your name! For a man to wrap himself up and draw his hat over his face, and then fall upon people who are walking about without any disguise, this is not the part of a gentleman. It is the part of a scoundrel and a knave. An anonymous review has no more authority than an anonymous letter, and one should be received with the same mistrust as the other. Or shall we take the name of the man who consents to preside over what is, in the strict sense of the word, une société anonyme, as a guarantee for the veracity of his colleagues? Even Rousseau, in the preface to the Nouvelle Héloïse, declares, "Every honest man must acknowledge the books he publishes," which in the plain language means that every honorable man ought to sign his articles, and that no one is honorable who does not do so. How much truer this is of polemical writing, which is the general character of reviews. Riemer was quite right in the opinion he gives in his Reminiscences of Goethe. An overt enemy, he says, an enemy who meets you face to face, is an honorable man who will treat you fairly, and with whom you can come to terms and be reconciled. But an enemy who conceals himself is a base, cowardly scoundrel, who has not courage enough to avow his own judgment. It is not his opinion that he cares about, but only the secret pleasures of wreaking his anger without being found out or punished. Anonymity is the refuge for all literary and journalistic rascality. It is a practice which must be completely stopped. Every article, even in a newspaper, should be accompanied by the name of its author, and the editor should be made strictly responsible for the accuracy of the signature. The freedom of the press should be thus far restricted, so that when a man publicly proclaims, through the far-sounding trumpet of the newspaper, he should be answerable for it, at any rate with his honor, if he has any, and if he has none, let his name neutralize the effect of his words. And since even the most insignificant person is known in his own circle, the result of such a measure would be to put an end to 2/3 of the newspaper lies, and to restrain the audacity of many a poisonous tongue. In this final section of the essay, Schopenhauer remarks that literary journals, the sort of authority of criticism, should be able to reduce the supply of bad writing available to the public, maybe by 90%. That the prospect of having their work absolutely roasted by a really high quality and aggressive literary journal would deter the money-obsessed scribblers who now kind of deface the literary scene and waste the public's time and money with their garbage. So he suggests that we should make blame and harsh criticism common and make praise relatively rare, an exact reversal of the kind of incentive structure that we have now in literary journals, where many things are praised and criticism is relatively rare, he thinks. He also makes this good point that there should be no tolerance for the stupid in literary circles and maybe in cultural circles generally. In manners in society, yes, because we have to get along with each other. But here, in the realm of what is excellent in culture, literature, art, and science, absolutely not. There's just the repression and exclusion of low-quality work and low-quality thinking. He suggests that maybe each country, each literary culture would be able to sustain at most one such journal, maybe one for Germany, one for France, one for America, or one for the East Coast of America. And then we get to anonymity, and we find out here that Schopenhauer strongly against it. It serves as a shield for awful critics, for mediocre minds to shoot barbs from the safety of the shadows at people who are either great or attempting to become great. And there's this great quote from the end, which I think is memorable, that it's better to have an overt enemy than one who hides in the shadows. There's something dishonorable about this. Schopenhauer goes on about this at great length, and of course he's writing for the literary culture of Frankfurt and the other rest of Germany where he's living at his time, maybe thinking as well of France and Italy. But his suggestion is make everybody put his name to his words, and so people can judge the quality of his criticism according to his reputation, have him put his honor at stake, or at the very least, if he has no honor, let people know that it was a man without honor who wrote this particular criticism. So how this would apply to today's internet culture, where a lot of people remain anonymous for fear of damage to their own livelihoods or being doxxed or being sought out and punished or somehow other inconvenienced in their non-internet life for what they've said. I don't know if that's appreciably different from the environment in which Schopenhauer is writing or not. It seems like it's a bit more savage and there's a bit more at stake, certainly a much larger, broader audience. But what do you think of that? If you leave a comment below, I'm interested to know what you think about this. Is Schopenhauer, have circumstances changed enough between Schopenhauer's time and our own that his condemnation of anonymity would need to be revised? That if he were aware of our circumstances, he might think differently from what he expresses here. So I'd appreciate that. Thanks very much. The next essay in the art of literature is on reputation, and we'll tackle that one in the next video. Thanks for watching today. Goodbye.